Hi, this is Adam at The Noise Chap, and this is just a short video on the basics of noise safety at work. Just before diving into it, there are a couple of key principles just to be aware of. When we talk about noise, first off, 3 decibels is double the volume. Now, go with it. Because noise is measured using a logarithmic scale, it means that every time it increases by 3 decibels, the power of the noise doubles. The reason that's important, if you are talking about a machine that is 88 decibels and a machine that is 85 decibels, then the machine that is 88 is twice as dangerous as the one that's 85. So the reason I flag that is just that even though the numbers look very similar and the differences can seem small, the risk is significantly different between them, and we'll all just ignore the collie behind me. The other thing is to just remember that 0 decibels is not silence. 0 decibels is considered to be the limit of human hearing. So teenagers, they can go down to -5, -10, even -15 decibels and still hear a noise. Once you get into your 30s, 40s, 50s, not a chance. But 0 isn't silence. So within noise, nobody would ever say don't have any noise around you at all. Noise is important. It makes things interesting. It makes films more engaging. If you went to a club or a concert and the music was on really quietly, people just wouldn't enjoy it as much. What we're saying is don't have too much noise. So a little bit of noise is okay. Your ears can take a certain amount of noise in a day. And what we're basically saying is save that up for something you do want to listen to and don't use it listening to a punch press or a CNC cutting all day. So just use the noise for stuff you do want to listen to. Within noise, what we don't tend to get is much down the bottom end of the decibel scale. So there's not a lot in the 30, 40 decibel range. That is very quiet. Most people would consider that to be an absolutely quiet environment. We start to get really interested in it when it gets to around 80 decibels. 80 decibels is the point where you need to start raising your voice to have a conversation. So if you're standing in a factory and 2 of you are there and 1 of you is speaking and you're having to raise your voice a little to be heard, or somebody's having to really concentrate to listen to you, that's a sign it's getting to around 80 decibels. 80 decibels is not really going to damage your hearing. 80 decibels is a sign for an employer that they need to do things like a noise assessment to actually measure the noise and see what the noise risk is. The critical bit kicks in at 85. 85 decibels is where the majority of people exposed to 85 decibels all day, every day, over time, run a risk of developing what we call noise-induced hearing loss, what used to be called industrial deafness. We got rid of the word industrial deafness, by the way, because that implies a cause, whereas a lot of people will get noise outside of work in concerts, in gigs, in theatres and cinemas, anything like that. So we call it noise-induced hearing loss, and the risk of that really kicks in around 85 decibels. That's actually quite a common noise. You walk into a busy pub on a Friday night, a lot of people talking, that'll be about 85 decibels. Same with work, CNCs, plasma cutters, thicknessers, paint spraying, that's commonly around 85 decibels, but so is walking alongside a main road to get to that in the first place. So you can easily get 85 decibels worth of noise, both away from work and in work. And the limit is 85 decibels for 8 hours. And from this point on, the more noise you get, the less you can be there. So 90 decibels, for example, you can be in 90 decibels for about 2.5 hours a day before it starts to have a problem. So 85 decibels was 8 hours, 90 decibels is now 2.5 hours. At 85 decibels, the majority of people exposed to 85 decibels all day, every day, will start to develop some form of hearing loss. At 90 decibels, everybody exposed to that all day, every day, will develop some form of hearing loss. And 90 decibels is still not actually that loud. Socially, it is quite a common noise. If you're in busy restaurants, loud pubs, even if there's no music, just a really busy pub, that'll be about 90 decibels. Cinemas easily can be around 90 decibels. But also things like driving along in your car on an A road with a window open. That's about 90 decibels. At work, it is a very common noise for things like chop saws, water jet cutting, reciprocating saws, belt sanders, bench grinders, anything like that tends to be around 90 decibels. It's worth saying that as well as these averages, there are actually peak limits as well, which is the instantaneous bang, so kind of slamming a door, dropping a pallet. The limit for that is about 137 decibels. A common one for that, for example, is in a quiet packing area. The average noise level is perfectly fine in there, but then somebody walks in dragging a big wooden pallet and then just lets go, and that bang as the pallet hits the floor can be 137, 138 dBc, and that itself is over the limits. And that has the power to damage hearing pretty much instantaneously. So how do you know that noise is getting to be an issue? Well, the quick, rough and ready way is if two of you are standing having a conversation, do you need to raise your voice to be heard? Or are people starting to really have to concentrate to hear what's being said? And that's a sign that noise is starting to get to around 80 decibels. If you get the HSE turn up on a site, they walk around the factory, they're having to concentrate to hear what's being said, or having to raise their voice slightly. That's when they'll ask to see a noise assessment. And if noise may be around 80 decibels, that's when employers have to do a noise assessment, the actual measuring the noise bit. If the levels come in at 85, then they need to do things like reduce the noise levels back where they can. Hearing protection becomes mandatory. Hearing testing is required, which is basically the backstop to make sure that everything else is working and that employees are not having their hearing damaged. So I keep talking about hearing damage, but what actually is that? Well, noise is a pressure wave in the air, and it comes through the air, goes down your ear canal and hits the eardrum. So the eardrum is a flap of skin completely sealing the ear canal, and that starts to vibrate in response to the noise. And when it does, it turns the noise from pressure into vibration. That then is passed into what we call the cochlea, which is the inner part of your ear, via three little small bones. And the cochlea is a tube basically full of a thick fluid with about 15,000 little hair cells sticking up into that fluid. Those hair cells flap backwards and forwards depending on the pressure and the vibration that they receive, and as they do so, they switch on, they switch off. When they switch on, they send a signal to the brain saying there's a noise here, and your brain interprets the combination of those as speech or as music or as any other sound. So it's that little switch on, switch off of these little sensor cells that is what you actually hear as noise. Part of your ear is physically moving in response to the noise. And when you get too much noise, the more sensitive parts of those hair cells just die. They break off and die. You go from having a nice thick bunch of those hair cells to it being quite Spartan. And that means you now can no longer hear those particular sounds, those particular frequencies. Now, noise is quite insidious. It doesn't just make everything quieter. Your ear is more sensitive to critical sounds in speech than anything else. So what noise does is it starts to take away the ability to follow speech before it starts to damage anything else. And that's where you get the archetypal situation where somebody's having to really concentrate to hear what's being said. You've got the old situation where somebody is sitting in a pub, they can hear what's being going on the other side of the room because they can still hear, their volume is perfectly fine, but they can't hear what somebody is saying sat next to them. The noise around them starts to just overwhelm speech because their ear's just not picking up those sounds. And that is noise damage, what we call noise-induced hearing loss. I'm not trying to be patronising, but this is the first line of a children's nursery rhyme, how somebody with noise-induced hearing loss will hear it. They're sitting in a pub or a restaurant having a conversation, and they're having to fill in the gaps to try and work out what's being said. They're using context. They're actually starting to lip read a little maybe, and they're guessing to try and fill in what's going on. Whereas this is what it's actually said, and everybody else is just happily going along with the conversation. And that can become quite isolating. So as well as hearing damage from noise, you can also get tinnitus caused by too much noise. Now, tinnitus has 101 causes. It's not only caused by noise, it can be caused by tiredness and by stress and by other medication. A bang on the head. You can get tinnitus just from getting older as your ears start to deteriorate. But noise can also cause it. You start to lose part of your hearing and your ear can compensate for it. Your brain knows there should be a noise there, and therefore you start to get this whistle in your ears that's almost your brain adding it back in. It's overcompensating for an area in your ear which is effectively dead. And tinnitus can be life-changing. For some people, it can start to become really detrimental. It impacts all parts of your life, but particularly when you are trying to sleep and all you can hear is this noise in your ears. So noise can damage your hearing in the first place and can also cause tinnitus, which is why it's such a big deal, because there's no treatment for that. Once it's gone, it's gone. Now, obviously, one of the key controls for noise that will come about is hearing protection. Employers have to do what they can to get rid of the noise risk, but for most workplaces, there will always be a bit of a noise risk that's left there behind, and hearing protection is needed, which means earplugs, earmuffs. Now, what you cannot use as hearing protection is standard noise cancelling or noise reducing headphones, whether they're in ear or over ear. They're just not hearing protection. Apple particularly seem to quite like using the phrase hearing protection for the AirPods, but they're not certified as hearing protection. Therefore, they are not hearing protection in a workplace. The issue is it's not really proven how much noise they knock off. They are effective, certainly, but they're not certified as hearing protection to the same level as health and safety required earplugs and earmuffs. So we don't know for certain how much noise they knock off in any given situation. And also the music that people listen to will more than add that noise back in again. And they tend to end up at a higher noise level than they started with in the first place. So you cannot use standard noise music playing headphones as hearing protection at work. There are alternatives. You can get hearing protection that plays music back. They are certified as hearing protection, but also they will not play back inside the earmuff at over 85 decibels, so you can't play it so loud it will damage your hearing. I myself use those. I've got some Isotunes Air Defenders. They're very good, perfectly good. Nowhere near as loud as normal music playing headphones, but they are good for use at work. So hearing protection falls into two categories really: earplugs, earmuffs. Within plugs, you're usually looking at those soft, squishy foam ones. Nothing wrong with them, they're perfectly fine. In fact, the strongest hearing protection on the market are squishy foam plugs, and some of the gentlest hearing protection on the market are squishy foam plugs. They fill the full range of noise reduction. The important with those squishy foam ones is that you actually roll them up, put them in your ear, and you need to actually lift the ear slightly. Your ear canal is slightly banana shaped, so you lift it, then put the foam plug in, and just keep your finger on it for a little bit while it expands. That stops it expanding out of the ear. When it's in correctly, you should only see the end of the earplug, not be able to see any of the side. Earplugs don't get stuck. They will come out again. Your ear canal is constantly kind of pushing them out, so they will come out again. And they don't get stuck down your ear, but they need to be in all the way to do their job. If they're out part of the way, then the noise can go around most of the earplug, and you don't get the noise protection that you need. With an ear muff, they sit over the ear, and the important thing there is that the seal is whole, so nothing breaking the seal, which can be an issue with hats, bump caps, hard hats. Just pushing the ear muff off slightly, and then the noise will go in around the side of them. So make sure they're on properly. There is no best in terms of which one should people use. Some people really don't like putting things inside their ears, therefore use ear muffs. Not everybody has the same shape ear canal. Most ear canals are quite round, but you do get some people who have almost a cat's eye shape ear canal. So it's quite narrow, quite tall. They can struggle with an earplug that goes in. Fine, use an ear muff. If people don't like ear muffs because they don't like them squeezing the side of their head, then use an earplug. You have the alternative. But one or the other has to be used. What we're not allowed to do is say, well, I don't like putting things in my ear and I don't like the squeeze of the ear muff, I'll just not wear anything. We're not allowed to do that. We can't even have people sign disclaimers. Often employees will say, well, look, I don't want to wear it. I'll accept the risk. If I get any damage, that's my fault, my problem, nothing to do with the employer. We're not allowed to do that. That has no weight in law at all. The employer still has a duty to protect employees at work, and they can't just pass that off to the employee saying, yeah, go on, I'll have the risk, it's fine, it's my problem. Also, you just know there would be some dodgy employers out there who would have a quiet word with all the employees saying, look, we're not going to give you any protection here, just sign this saying you accept the risk, you can keep your job and get on with it. You just can't do that kind of thing. All right, so earplugs, earmuffs, they have to be worn when you're in a high noise area. So that's very much the short and sharp version of noise safety. There's another video on this website that you can have a look at if you're interested, which has some filters applied to pieces of music demonstrating noise-induced hearing loss and what it actually sounds like. And that can be quite interesting to just get a handle on what we're talking about with this kind of thing. And also your employer should be telling you what the noise levels are in your workplace, what kind of noise risk you're facing. But noise can be perfectly well controlled. Earplugs, earmuffs do the job nicely. In fact, the issue in most workplaces I tend to come across is too much protection, not too little. And I'm always trying to get employers to backpedal a little on the amount of hearing protection they've got, just so that people can still hear what's going on around them. And also, if you have a hearing testing program, take advantage of that, because that really is the backstop that is just confirming everything else is working and that your hearing should last a lifetime. So there you go, noise safety at work.